In the uncharted depths of the Andromeda Galaxy, far from Earth, a human spaceship known as the Odyssey drifted silently through the void. It was on a critical reconnaissance mission to explore new star systems. The crew, led by Captain Carter, was eager to chart the unknown regions and gather intelligence that could benefit humanity in the future. Yet the crew had no idea that their mission was about to take an unexpected turn that would test their skills, ingenuity, and their very survival. The galaxy was vast and full of mysteries. Most star systems had been mapped, but there were still uncharted sectors where no one dared to venture. These regions were thought to be too dangerous or simply devoid of value. Captain Carter was determined to push beyond the boundaries and uncover what lay in the unexplored territories, even if it meant risking the safety of her crew. As the Odyssey sailed further into the depths of space, a sudden and unexplainable gravitational anomaly jolted the ship. Warning alarms blared, and the crew scrambled to assess the situation. The anomaly had disrupted the ship's course, dragging it into a remote system at the edge of the galaxy. The onboard navigation systems were failing, and within moments, they found themselves pulled toward an unknown planet. Despite the crew's best efforts to regain control, the ship was rapidly losing altitude. Brace for impact. Captain Carter's voice echoed through the ship's intercom, filled with authority and calm in the face of chaos. The Odyssey crash-landed on the surface of the strange planet. It was a harsh, barren world with twin suns in the sky and an atmosphere that seemed to hum with energy. The ship's landing gear was severely damaged, and the crew knew it would be impossible to leave without external help. They were stranded. After taking stock of the damage, Captain Carter and her senior officers gathered in the ship's control room. Lieutenant Theo Grant, the ship's engineer, was the first to speak. "Captain, our engines are fried. We're not going anywhere without parts, and the nearest star system is over 40 light-years away. We need supplies, and fast." Captain Carter nodded grimly. The situation was dire. The planet was uninhabited, or so they thought. The Odyssey scanners showed no signs of civilization, but there was a faint signal coming from the far side of the planet. A strange, almost imperceptible transmission. This could be a trap, Lieutenant Sarah Vance, the communications officer, warned. She was always cautious, and for good reason. "There's a reason this sector is off-limits. We don't know who, or what, might be here." Carter remained silent for a moment, weighing her options. The crew had limited supplies, and their chances of surviving without help were slim. They would have to make contact, even if it meant risking an encounter with whoever, or whatever, was transmitting the signal. "We don't have a choice," Captain Carter said, her voice steady but firm. "Prepare a team. We're going to investigate." As they geared up for the expedition, Carter's thoughts briefly drifted to her home planet. She had seen the challenges humanity faced: wars, poverty, and division. But she had also witnessed the remarkable resilience of her people. Humans had survived countless obstacles throughout history, and now, it was her turn to lead them through another crisis. The team was ready, and Carter led them into the unknown. The planet's surface was barren, the landscape covered in rocky outcrops and strange, crystalline formations. The air was thin, and the atmosphere had an odd charge to it, making every movement feel slightly off-kilter. Despite the dangers, Carter was resolute. Humanity had always thrived in the face of adversity. After several hours of trekking across the hostile terrain, they'd reached the source of the transmission. A large structure, partially buried in the ground. It was unlike anything they had seen before. Towering spires of metal and alien architecture, radiating an aura of mystery and power. There were no signs of life, but the signal was unmistakably coming from within. The team approached cautiously. Captain Carter signaled to her crew to stay alert. With every step, the silence seemed to grow heavier. As they entered the structure, they found a massive chamber, its walls adorned with intricate symbols and glowing lights. The air was thick with energy, and the team could feel the presence of something ancient. Then they saw it, A figure standing at the center of the room, a humanoid figure, tall and imposing, with an exoskeleton that shimmered under the artificial light. The being was completely still, its presence commanding. "Who are you?" Captain Carter asked, her voice unwavering despite the tension. The figure remained silent for a long moment, studying the humans with eyes that glowed faintly with an ethereal blue light. Finally, it spoke, its voice low and resonant. "You should not have come here." The words echoed in the chamber, and the crew froze. The tone was not one of immediate hostility, but a warning that this planet, this alien race, would not welcome outsiders. Captain Carter could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she remained composed. She had seen first contact situations go wrong before, but she was determined to ensure this one would not end in violence. "We came by accident," Captain Carter explained, her voice calm. "Our ship was damaged, and we need help. We seek only peace and assistance." The figure remained silent again, as if weighing the words carefully. The tension in the room was palpable. Captain Carter's crew exchanged wary glances, ready for anything. But then, something unexpected happened. From the shadows of the chamber emerged a second figure. This one was different, feminine, elegant and exuding an aura of authority. Her eyes locked onto Captain Carter's, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. There was something otherworldly about her presence, a sense of power and mystery that both intrigued and intimidated. "This is Lyana." The first figure spoke again, his voice laced with caution. "She speaks for our people." Lyana's gaze softened as she studied the humans before her. Despite the intimidating presence of the alien figure, there was a sense of curiosity in her eyes. She had seen many species, but the humans were different. They'd radiated a mix of vulnerability and determination that intrigued her. "We will see what can be done," Lyana said, her voice carrying an authority that demanded respect. The crew of the Odyssey exchanged cautious glances, but they knew this was only the beginning of a complex journey. Trust would have to be earned, and they would need to navigate the delicate balance between cooperation and conflict if they were to survive. The crew of the Odyssey stood in tense silence, the weight of Lyana's words hanging in the air. They were caught between hope and caution. This alien race, who had made it clear they did not welcome outsiders, had promised to help. Yet the subtle warning in the first figure's words lingered in Captain Carter's mind. There was something about this encounter that didn't sit right. She had been in enough situations to sense danger when it was near. "Thank you," Captain Carter finally said, breaking the silence. "We appreciate your willingness to hear us out." Lyana nodded, but her expression remained unreadable. She motioned for them to follow, and the crew obeyed, their eyes scanning the alien architecture as they moved deeper into the structure. The walls seemed to pulse with an energy that was both inviting and unsettling, as though the building itself had a consciousness. As they ventured further into the complex, they reached what appeared to be a control room, larger, with panels that flickered with alien symbols and holographic projections. The alien figure who had first spoken to them, Vir, stepped to the side, allowing Lyana to approach the central console. "Here," Lyana said, touching a series of glowing symbols. The display flickered and shifted, revealing a map of the planet's surface and surrounding areas. "This is our world and our defenses. You must understand, humans are not welcome here." Captain Carter stepped forward, her gaze focused on the map. "We're not here to conquer or disrupt. Our ship is damaged, and we need supplies to survive. We're willing to do whatever it takes to gain your trust and avoid further conflict." Lyana's eyes lingered on Captain Carter for a moment, as if measuring her words. "Your kind is persistent," she said, her voice soft, but laced with a quiet intensity. "We have seen your kind before. Weak, full of ambition and desire, always taking without regard for the consequences. You think you can just land here, uninvited, and expect us to help you." Captain Carter's heart sank as she heard the words, but she stood her ground. "I understand your distrust, but you're wrong about us. We don't want to take anything. We simply want to leave. And for that, we need your help. If you have what we need, we can go. And you will never see us again." Lyana's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the air seemed to grow colder. "You think you can make demands of us after invading our sacred land? You are not the first to ask for our assistance under false pretenses. I will give you no promises until you prove your intentions." The room grew thick with tension, the exchange between Captain Carter and Lyana becoming a battle of words and wills. The crew felt it, the subtle but undeniable shift in the atmosphere. They were at the mercy of this alien race, and whether they left this world alive or not depended entirely on how they navigated the days ahead. Before Captain Carter could respond, Viewer spoke up, his voice heavy with authority. "Lyana," he said, his tone a blend of command and caution, "perhaps we should allow the humans to prove their worth before we pass judgment. I agree they must prove their intentions, but we are not in a position to turn them away. Their survival could be beneficial for all of us." Lyana turned to Veer, her gaze icy. "You do not understand," she replied. "The humans do not belong here. We have long protected our land from such intruders. There are things on this world that should not be disturbed. Perhaps it is time to let go of the past," Veer countered, stepping closer to Lyana. "Things are changing. Our world is changing. And perhaps so should we." The air crackled with the tension between the two, each of their convictions clear. It was obvious that their people had a long history of defending their planet from outsiders, and it was equally clear that Lyana, in particular, held a deep reverence for these traditions. Yet Veer's words hinted at something more, an openness to change, an understanding that not everything could be controlled. After a moment, Lyana's expression softened, though her wariness remained. "Fine," she said reluctantly. "You may stay. But do not mistake this for acceptance. If you wish to survive, you must prove you are worthy of our help." Captain Carter nodded, understanding that this fragile truce had been forged, but the road ahead was anything but certain. "Thank you," she said again, this time with a sense of resolve. "We will do what it takes." With that, the crew followed Lyana and Veer out of the control room and into another part of the facility. There, they were shown to a storage area filled with strange technology and materials, some of which might be useful for repairing the Odyssey. But the crew couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a supply run. They had stepped into a world where their every move would be scrutinized and trust would be hard-won. As they loaded the supplies, Lieutenant Grant, the ship's engineer, voiced a concern that had been gnawing at him since their arrival. "Captain, these materials, they don't look like anything we've ever seen before. We may not even know how to use them. If we try to fix the ship with this, we might end up making things worse." "I know," Captain Carter replied, her eyes scanning the alien technology. "But we don't have any other choice. We can't stay here forever." Lieutenant Vance spoke up, her voice filled with caution. "What if these materials are part of some test? What if they're setting us up to fail?" Captain Carter's eyes narrowed as she thought about it. It was a possibility, but they couldn't afford to turn back now. The tension between the two races was palpable, and every move they made would either bring them closer to an alliance or further from survival. That night, as the crew slept in the dimly lit chambers of the alien structure, Captain Carter stayed awake, staring at the strange technology that would determine their fate. It was clear that the relationship between the humans and the Zari was fragile at best, and any wrong move could ignite a conflict that neither side could survive. The question remained, would humanity's resilience, ingenuity, and determination be enough to prove they were worthy of the Zari's trust? The Odyssey's crew awoke the following morning to an uneasy silence. The night had been long, filled with the sounds of strange alien machinery and whispered conversations between the Zari, but no immediate danger had been presented. Still, the tension hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Captain Carter had barely slept, her mind racing with the implications of the fragile peace they had struck. Their survival depended on the goodwill of the Zari, and that goodwill was a thread thin enough to snap at any moment. The crew gathered in the common area, their faces tired but resolute. They had to find a way to make this work, to show the Zari that humans were not a threat, that they were capable of cooperation and trust. But there was a sense of foreboding in the air, and it was clear that the Zari, especially Lyana, were not convinced. Lieutenant Grant, ever the pragmatic engineer, was the first to break the silence. "Captain, we've had a chance to examine the materials we were given," he said, looking over a datapad filled with alien symbols and energy readings. "These components, they're unlike anything we've encountered before. It's going to take a lot of work to integrate them into our systems, and I'm not sure we can make it work with what we have." Captain Carter nodded. "We'll need to find a way. There's no going back now." She paused, looking at her crew. "We may be in over our heads, but we're not backing down. We need to show them we're resourceful, that we can fix this ship and leave without causing any more trouble." The air outside the facility was thick with heat, and the twin suns hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the alien landscape. Lyana had promised to show them the way to the supply depot, but there was a hesitation in her step when she arrived at the entrance. She motioned for the crew to follow but said little. Her silence was as much of a message as any words could be. The journey to the depot was uneventful, but the atmosphere was heavy. Lyana led the group through dense alien forests, the tall, shimmering trees casting odd reflections in the sunlight. The crew couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the landscape, even as the tension between them and the Zari remained. Lyana, for all her stoicism, seemed to be deep in thought, her eyes darting back and forth as if weighing every move they made. When they arrived at the depot, the humans found a large storage facility filled with an assortment of alien materials, strange metals, high-tech components, and unknown substances. The Zari had clearly prepared this area for their own use, and it was obvious that the humans were out of their depth. Still, they had no choice but to begin the process of sorting through the materials, hoping to find what they needed to repair the ship. Lyana stood by, watching them with a skeptical eye. "You will not have access to everything here," she said, her voice cold. "Only what we deem necessary. Do not attempt to take anything more." Captain Carter nodded, understanding that they were still under the watchful eyes of the Zari. "We understand. We're not here to steal or take anything unnecessary. We just need enough to repair our ship." As the crew began their work, the mood was one of quiet determination. Lieutenant Grant led the effort, carefully examining each component, while Lieutenant Vance kept watch over the surroundings. Every now and then, Captain Carter would glance over at Lyana, whose eyes never seemed to leave them. There was a constant, unspoken tension between them, a reminder that they were intruders on this world, at the mercy of the Zari. It wasn't long before the Zari warriors began to gather near the edge of the depot, their presence a reminder that they were not trusted guests, but rather potential threats. Their towering forms stood like sentinels, eyes sharp and calculating. The crew did their best to ignore them, focusing on the task at hand, but it was impossible to shake the feeling that their every move was being scrutinized. As the sun began to set, casting a deep orange glow over the landscape, Captain Carter called for a break. The crew gathered together, exhausted but making progress. They had found several components that might work, though it was clear they were still a long way from completing the repairs. "We're getting closer," Lieutenant Grant said, wiping sweat from his brow. "But I can't promise we'll be able to fix the ship without more help." Captain Carter sighed, her mind racing. The Zari had made it clear that they wouldn't offer more assistance unless the humans could prove themselves. And right now, there was little to prove other than their will to survive. That's when Lyana approached again, her expression as unreadable as ever. "You have made progress," she said, her voice soft, but carrying an air of authority. "But it will not be enough. The technology here is beyond your comprehension. You are not prepared to use it." Captain Carter stood, meeting her gaze. "We've made it this far, and we'll keep going until we find a way. We won't quit, no matter how difficult it gets. Lyana's gaze softened for a brief moment before hardening once more. "Perhaps your stubbornness is what will save you," she said, almost as if to herself. Then she turned to leave, her footsteps echoing in the quiet evening air. The crew watched her go, unsure of what to make of her words. Was it a warning? A sign of respect? It was hard to tell with the Zari, who were so wrapped in their own ways. But one thing was clear: they had to earn Lyana's respect if they wanted to stand any chance of surviving here. And that meant continuing to prove that humans were capable of more than just survival. They were capable of greatness. As night fell, the crew gathered around the campfire, their minds occupied with the tasks ahead. They knew that the Zari were still watching, waiting for the humans to make their next move. But despite the uncertainty, there was a shared sense of determination among the crew. They had come too far to turn back now. Captain Carter looked out over the alien landscape, her thoughts as conflicted as the world they now found themselves on. "We can't afford to fail," she muttered under her breath, the weight of their mission pressing heavily on her shoulders. "Not now. Not ever." The silence of the night was broken only by the soft hum of alien machines and the distant sounds of Zari voices. In the depths of this alien world, where the rules were different and the stakes higher than they had ever known, the humans would have to fight not only for their survival, but for the respect of a people who had seen far too many intruders to trust easily. And in the distance, beneath the twin moons of the alien planet, something stirred, an unspoken promise that the battle for trust and survival was far from over. The days following their arrival on the Zari planet passed in a blur of hard work, frustration, and careful negotiations. The Odyssey crew had managed to repair some of the ship's vital systems, thanks to the Zari's grudging cooperation. Yet, every day, the tension between the two factions grew. While the humans worked tirelessly, the Zari observed them closely, offering help only when absolutely necessary. The barrier of mistrust between them remained strong, and Captain Carter knew that without something more, they might never gain the Zari's true respect. Lieutenant Grant had made significant headway with the alien components, but there were still so many unknowns. He sat in the ship's engineering bay, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tinkered with a mysterious Zari energy core. The glowing blue sphere before him pulsed with an energy that was both beautiful and dangerous. He wasn't sure whether they could even harness its power without making things worse, but there was little choice. The core had to be integrated into the ship's systems if they had any hope of leaving the planet. "Grant, how's it going?" Captain Carter's voice interrupted his focus, causing him to look up from the device. "I'm not sure," he admitted, rubbing his temples. "These components, they're unlike anything I've seen. It's a challenge to even understand how they work, let alone make them function within our systems. I've made a few adjustments, but there's a risk." Carter considered his words carefully. "We don't have the luxury of time. We have to make it work, whatever it takes." Grant nodded grimly, then glanced back at the energy core. He had come to a reluctant understanding with the Zari engineers, who had shown him how to handle their technology. But they never gave away their secrets, always careful to keep their distance. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched closely, their every move under scrutiny. Meanwhile, on the surface, the fragile peace between the humans and Zari was being tested. Lyana's presence was a constant reminder of the delicate balance they had struck. She had become somewhat of a bridge between the two species, but even she seemed uncertain, her eyes constantly shifting between wariness and something softer that Captain Carter couldn't quite place. The crew had grown accustomed to her silent observation. She rarely spoke to them unless necessary, but when she did, it was always with a layer of caution that suggested she was still weighing the human presence on her planet. The days were long, and the uncertainty of whether they would ever be allowed to leave hung over them. One afternoon, Captain Carter found herself walking with Lyana through the Zari city, a sprawling complex of gleaming metal structures and towering spires. The city was alive with activity, but there was an eerie calm to it. as if everything had a place and a purpose, and the humans were the exception to that order. "Do you really think your people will accept us?" Carter asked, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the city. "After everything, the distrust, the sabotage, will they ever truly trust us?" Lyana's gaze was fixed ahead, her voice low. "Our people are not like yours. We have suffered countless betrayals. Our history is one of survival, not peace. Trust is not something we offer freely." She paused, her tone softening for the first time. "But you are different. You do not simply bow to the world around you. You fight. You survive. Perhaps that is why you have made it this far." Carter wasn't sure if she was being complimented or merely tolerated. "You speak of survival," she said, glancing at Lyana. "But it's more than that, isn't it? You want to protect something. Something precious." Lyana's eyes flickered, a hint of vulnerability breaking through the armor of stoicism she had carefully built. "Our females are sacred to us. They are the future of our species. If anything were to happen to them, we would be no more." The words hit Carter harder than she expected. It was a reminder of the deep divide between the two species, their values, their priorities. For the Zari, the protection of their women was paramount. To approach them was seen as sacrilege, and for the humans to even be here at all was a violation of that sacred trust. "Then why help us at all?" Carter asked, the question slipping out before she could think better of it. "Why not just let us die here if we're such a threat?" Lyana stopped, turning to face Carter with a piercing gaze. "Because you are not all a threat. Because not all humans are the same. And because there is something about you that I cannot ignore. Perhaps in another time, another life, things could have been different." There was a strange, unsettling silence between them after that, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Carter had no answer for her. What could she say? She wasn't here to make allies or enemies. She was here to survive, to get her crew back home. As the days stretched on, the work continued. The crew was making progress with the ship's repairs, though still not enough to leave. Tensions between the Zori warriors and the humans began to show in more subtle ways: stray glances, tightened grips on weapons, quiet murmurs. Every time the crew ventured outside the ship to gather materials or work on repairs, they were watched, scrutinized by the silent, looming figures of the Zari. Then, one morning, the worst happened. The explosion came without warning, a sudden burst of light and sound that shook the entire camp. Captain Carter's heart skipped a beat as she rushed outside, her mind racing. Smoke billowed into the sky, and the distant screams of her crew could be heard. The Zari, too, were on high alert, their warriors scrambling to respond to the threat. But the attack was not from the Zari. Instead, it came from a rogue faction of humans, a group that had long since abandoned the ideals of diplomacy, who saw the Zari as nothing more than obstacles to their survival. They had sabotaged the ship in an attempt to escape, to take the technology they had stolen and leave without regard for the lives they endangered. Carter's blood ran cold. It was a betrayal, one that had come too soon, shattering any hope for peace between the two species. And it forced her into an impossible position. The crew's survival was now tied to their ability to stop these renegades before they ruined everything. As Captain Carter led her crew into battle, the Zuri warriors rallied to her side. For the first time, humans and Zari fought together, not out of mutual trust, but because the enemy was a greater threat. As the chaos unfolded around them, Lyana fought at Carter's side, her blade cutting through the attackers with precision. There, amid the violence, Carter realized something she hadn't expected. There was more to the Zari than their fearsome exterior. They, too, wanted to protect what was sacred. The battle was long and grueling, but in the end, the renegades were defeated. The Zari warriors, though hesitant at first, accepted the humans' assistance, and the camp slowly returned to a sense of uneasy calm. But the damage had been done. The trust they had been building had been tested, and Captain Carter knew that from here on out, the humans would have to prove themselves time and time again. As night fell and the distant stars shone bright over the Zari city, Carter stood at the edge of the camp, her thoughts heavy. The Zari had given them a chance, but she couldn't help but wonder how long they would be willing to extend it. Trust, once shattered, was difficult to rebuild. But in that moment, with the sounds of battle still echoing in the distance, Captain Carter vowed one thing. She would do whatever it took to ensure humanity's survival. They would prove that they were worth trusting, no matter the cost. The aftermath of the attack was a blur of recovery and reflection. The rogue humans had been dealt with, but the damage to both the Odyssey and the fragile alliance between humans and the Zari was undeniable. The once calm atmosphere had been replaced by a heightened sense of suspicion and unease. Both factions were wary of one another, but necessity kept them working together. Without the Zari's advanced technology, the humans had little hope of repairing their ship in time to escape the planet. Captain Carter spent long hours in the command center, overseeing the damage reports and strategizing with her crew. The Zari had not been quick to offer assistance, their warriors still deeply distrustful of the humans. However, the realization that the renegades had been a mutual threat had caused a shift in their behavior. While it didn't erase the centuries of hostility between their species, it did pave the way for an uneasy truce. The day after the battle, Carter called a meeting with the Zari leadership, including Lyana and Vior, the commander of the Zari forces. They gathered in a large open chamber, the high walls adorned with strange alien symbols, the air thick with tension. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the Zari's advanced technology, a constant reminder that the humans were still guests in this foreign world. Captain Carter. Vior's voice broke the silence, deep and commanding. You've proven yourselves in battle. Your people fought with honor. But the question remains, can we trust you? Can we trust that your presence here will not lead to further conflict? Carter met his gaze, standing tall despite the weight of the situation. She knew this moment would define everything. If they failed to convince the Zari of their intentions, the humans might never leave the planet alive. I can't speak for every human, she began, her voice steady, but I can speak for myself and my crew. We are not here to conquer or take what isn't ours. We are here by accident, stranded and trying to survive. The attack yesterday proves that we have enemies of our own, enemies who are just as dangerous to you as they are to us. But we are willing to work with you, to find a way to leave this world peacefully. Lyana, who had been standing by her side, finally spoke, her voice softer than Vior's, but still filled with the weight of her people's history. You speak of peace, Captain, but our history has shown that peace is a fragile thing. How can we be sure that your people will not bring harm to us once you've returned to the stars? Carter's heart sank, knowing that the Zari's fears were rooted in centuries of painful experience. I can't change the past, she said, her voice full of sincerity, but I can promise that we are not your enemies. We are not here to make things worse. We want to leave. But to do that, we need your help. There was a long silence as Vior and Lyana exchanged glances. It felt like an eternity before Vior spoke again, his tone thoughtful but guarded. We have lost too much to let this go easily, but perhaps there is a way forward. If you prove yourselves, if you demonstrate that you are not like the others who have come before, we will consider aiding you. Carter nodded, her resolve firm. We will prove ourselves. We will do whatever it takes. With that, the meeting ended, but the weight of their words lingered in the air. Carter knew that the next steps would be crucial. The Zari had offered them a lifeline, but it came with conditions. The humans would have to prove their worth, not just in battle, but in trust, in cooperation, and in respect for the Zari's way of life. As Carter walked back to the Odyssey, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. The Zari's reluctance to fully trust them, while understandable, was a constant reminder of the mountain they had to climb. But Carter was determined to make it to the top. Over the next few days, the humans worked tirelessly to repair the ship, focusing all their efforts on getting it functional enough to leave the planet. The Zari, though hesitant, had begun to offer more substantial help, providing rare materials and technology that could aid in the repairs. Yet each exchange felt like a test. Every interaction with the Zari warriors was scrutinized, every gesture weighed carefully for any sign of threat. Even Lyana, who had shown an unexpected openness, remained distant, as though torn between her loyalty to her people and her growing curiosity about the humans. During one of their joint repair sessions, Carter found herself working alongside Lyana again. The Zari woman had become a reliable partner, her knowledge of alien technology proving invaluable in navigating the complexities of the Zari ship systems. It was clear that Lyana had become more than just a figurehead of the Zari leadership. She was a force in her own right, a woman of strength and resilience. But there was still a barrier, a line that neither of them could cross. As they worked together in silence, Carter finally spoke, breaking the tension that had hung between them. "Do you ever wonder if we're just too different to ever really understand each other?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with the weight of their situation. Lyana paused, her eyes thoughtful. "Every day," she replied, her tone calm but laced with something deeper. "But perhaps it is in our differences that we will find a way to move forward. We have been shaped by our histories, by the struggles we have faced. You are not like the others who came before you. You fight for something more than just survival." Carter could feel the sincerity in Lyana's words. There was a bond between them, one that neither of them had asked for but one that had developed over time. It was the kind of bond forged through shared adversity, a recognition that perhaps they were more alike than they had initially thought. But as much as they had come to trust one another, Carter knew that the real test was still to come. The Zari were not known for their forgiveness, and the humans had to prove that their presence on this planet would not lead to further destruction. Later that evening, as the crew gathered for their daily debrief, Carter addressed them with a sense of urgency. "We've made progress with the Zari, but we cannot afford to grow complacent. We need to focus on finishing the repairs and preparing for departure. The Zari are watching us, and they will not hesitate to strike if they feel threatened. We need to show them that we are trustworthy, that we are not here to cause harm." Lieutenant Grant spoke up, his voice laced with concern. "Captain, I've been working with their technology, and it's difficult. We're getting closer, but I'm not sure how much more we can push. We need to be prepared for the possibility that we may not get out of here in time." Carter nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The clock was ticking, and every moment they spent on this hostile planet brought them closer to danger. But she refused to give up. There was too much at stake. As the crew worked late into the night, Carter found herself thinking of Lyana's words. "Perhaps it is in our differences that we will find a way forward." She couldn't help but wonder if the key to survival wasn't just in their ability to fix the ship, but in their ability to truly understand one another, humans and Zari, enemies and allies alike. The days passed in a blur of hard work and mounting tension. The Odyssey was slowly being repaired, its damaged systems coming back online. But time was running out. Every hour they spent on the Zari planet brought them closer to an uncertain future. The Zari, although providing aid, had made it clear that their patience had limits. The fragile alliance was being tested in ways no one had anticipated. Captain Carter was feeling the pressure more than anyone. The weight of her crew's survival rested on her shoulders, and the Zari were growing more impatient by the day. They had made it clear that their trust could not be earned overnight, and every action, every decision made by the humans was scrutinized. It didn't help that the rogue faction of the Zari, those who still opposed the humans, had gone silent. No one knew if they were regrouping for another attack or if they had retreated for good. The uncertainty was as dangerous as any weapon, a growing divide. One evening, Carter sat in the command center, reviewing the latest reports. Lieutenant Grant had made significant progress on the ship's repairs, but there were still major issues with the energy systems. If they couldn't get the power core stable, they would never be able to leave the planet. "Captain," Grant's voice crackled over the comms. "We've got a problem with the reactor core. I need more Zari parts to stabilize it, but they're refusing to give us what we need. They say it's too dangerous for us to handle their technology. Carter leaned back in her chair, frustration rising. The Zari had been helping in small doses, but they were now pulling back, unwilling to give the humans the resources they so desperately needed. She could feel the tension growing between their two peoples, a tension that threatened to boil over at any moment. She stood up, moving toward the window, her gaze fixed on the dark horizon of the alien planet. The Zari were proud and protective, especially of their women. The attack from the rogue faction had not only caused physical damage, but had reopened old wounds. Carter knew that the key to moving forward lay in breaking down the walls between them. But how could they do that when the Zari refused to trust them, even in the most basic ways? The meeting. The next day, Carter called for a meeting with Vior, Lyana, and the other Zari leaders. It was time to address the growing divide between their two species. If they didn't find a way to cooperate fully, their only chance of survival would slip through their fingers. The meeting took place in the same chamber where they had negotiated before. The atmosphere was heavy, thick with distrust and unspoken tension. Vior sat at the head of the table, his expression stern as usual. Lyana stood at his side, her eyes betraying a flicker of concern. Carter and her crew entered the room, their presence making the air even heavier. "Captain," Vior began, his voice cold. "Your people have had time to prove yourselves. Yet you continue to ask for our help without giving us what we need in return. You expect us to risk our lives, our resources, for a race that has caused nothing but trouble throughout the galaxy." Carter's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "We are not the ones who started this, Vior. We're not here to conquer, to take anything from you. We're here because we were forced to be. And now we need your help to lead your world. But without your cooperation, we will not survive." Vior's eyes narrowed, studying her carefully. There was a long silence as everyone in the room waited for his response. Finally, he spoke again. "Your words are bold, but words alone do not earn trust. Trust is earned through action, Captain. You claim you are different from the others who have come before. But how can we know that? How can we be sure you won't turn on us the moment you leave?" Carter stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "I understand your fear, Vior. Your people have been through much, but we can't change the past. We can only prove ourselves now, in this moment. If we don't work together, both our species will suffer. The rogue faction is still out there, and they will strike again if we are divided. We don't have time for mistrust." Lyana stepped forward, her voice softer than Vior's but no less powerful. "Captain Carter speaks the truth. We've seen the strength of your people, your determination, but we must also consider the risks. We cannot afford another attack, not when we're so close to completing the repairs." Carter nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. Lyana's words carried weight, and the trust between them had grown since the battle. She knew that if anyone could sway Vior's opinion, it would be Lyana. The breakthrough. The tension in the room was palpable as the two sides continued to debate, but slowly something began to shift. The Zari, while still wary, started to see the humans not as invaders but as equals in a shared struggle for survival. Carter and Lyana's partnership was undeniable, and even Vior, for all his skepticism, seemed to grudgingly respect the humans' resolve. "We will give you the parts you need," Vior finally said, his tone less hostile than before. "But know this, your actions will determine the future of our people. If you betray us, the consequences will be severe." Carter exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Thank you, Vior. We will not betray your trust. I promise you that." Lyana gave Carter a small, approving nod. "Perhaps, Captain, this is the beginning of something greater. Perhaps together, we can build something that lasts." The calm before the storm. With the Zari's decision to help, the humans quickly got to work. The ship was nearly repaired, and the final stages of the reactor stabilization were underway. But even as they celebrated this victory, a sense of unease lingered. The rogue faction had not made a move yet, but Carter knew that they wouldn't sit idly by for long. Time was running out. That night, as Carter sat in her quarters, she reflected on the journey so far. The challenges had been great, but the bonds formed between the humans and the Zari were stronger than ever. She knew that their survival depended not just on their ability to repair the ship, but on their ability to overcome the deep mistrust that still lingered between their species. The atmosphere aboard the Odyssey was thick with anticipation as the crew made their final preparations. The repairs were almost complete, and their brief respite was coming to an end. Captain Carter sat in her quarters, staring at the data streaming across her console. The Zari had kept their word, providing the necessary components to stabilize the reactor core, but Carter knew better than to think their alliance was solidified. The rogue faction was still out there, and their silence was far more dangerous than any open conflict. Carter stood, pacing the room, her mind racing. She had forged a fragile bond with the Zari, but trust wasn't something that could be built in days. It had taken years for the humans to learn how to work together as a crew, and they still struggled with doubts and fears. How could she expect the Zari to forget the centuries of conflict they had endured? It wasn't just about the supplies anymore. It was about survival, and if the rogue Zari attacked again, all they had worked for would be destroyed. Suddenly, the door to her quarters slid open. Lieutenant Grant stepped inside, his face grim. "Captain, we got a problem." Carter turned to him, her brow furrowing. "What's going on?" Grant hesitated before speaking, glancing at the door as if to ensure no one else was listening. "It's the rogue faction, Captain. They've been spotted near the eastern plains. There's word that they're gathering, preparing for something big. It's not just a small group this time. There are hundreds of them." Carter's heart sank. The peace they had fought so hard to establish was teetering on the brink of collapse. The rogue faction wasn't just a threat to the Odyssey and its crew. They were a direct threat to the Zari themselves. And if the rogue faction succeeded in sabotaging the humans' efforts to leave, they would leave the Zari vulnerable to even greater destruction. "How long do we have?" Carter asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Hard to say, Captain," Grant replied. "But we should be ready to act within the next few hours. We've already informed the Zari, but they haven't responded yet. They're waiting to see if we'll back them up. If we don't, the whole planet could fall into chaos." Carter clenched her fists. She knew the stakes were higher than they had ever been. This wasn't just about getting their ship repaired anymore. It was about survival, of both their species, of the fragile peace they had built, and of everything they had worked toward. With a resolute nod, she turned to Grant. "Prepare the crew. We need to be ready for whatever comes. We'll work with the Zari, but we'll take the lead. They trust us, and we need to prove we're worthy of that trust." Grant didn't hesitate. "Understood, Captain." As he left, Carter looked out the viewport. The twin suns of the Zari world were setting, casting a warm glow over the planet's surface. She thought of Lyana, the Zari woman who had become an unexpected ally, whose connection with Carter had grown stronger with every passing day. She knew that Lyana was as committed to peace as she was, but Carter couldn't help but feel a pang of doubt. Would it be enough? Would the Zari accept their help when the time came, or would the rogue faction drive them further apart? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden alert flashing across her console. The Zari had responded. Veer's message was short, but clear. "The rogue faction is moving. We will fight alongside you, but we expect nothing less than full cooperation. If you fail us now, all will be lost." Carter's hand hovered over the console, her decision clear. Send the response. Prepare the fleet. We fight together, or not at all. As the crew gathered on the bridge, the gravity of the situation settled over them like a dark cloud. Lyana entered, her expression unreadable, but her eyes betrayed a storm of emotions. She had always been reserved, but Carter saw something new in her gaze, a resolve that matched her own. "Captain," Lyana said softly, her voice steady but tinged with the weight of their circumstances. "We cannot afford to fail. For both our people." Carter nodded, her voice unwavering. We won't fail. We'll stop them. Together. The countdown began as the Odyssey prepared for battle. The Zari ships, sleek and deadly, formed alongside the human fleet, their designs as alien and beautiful as the warriors who piloted them. Carter could feel the tension in the air, but she also felt something else, an unspoken understanding between the humans and the Zari. They were fighting for something greater than survival now. They were fighting for a future. The battle erupted with shocking speed. The rogue faction came in waves, their ships descending on the human and Zari fleets with overwhelming force. It was chaos. Explosions rocked the sky as lasers lit up the darkness, and the once calm atmosphere of cooperation dissolved into a whirlwind of violence. But amidst the battle, Carter and Lyana fought side by side, their bond proving to be their greatest weapon. Carter's human ingenuity and Lyana's Zari strength combined in a seamless dance of strategy and raw power. As they destroyed one enemy ship after another, it became clear that this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future of both their peoples. Hours passed like minutes, and the sky became a blinding blur of fire and smoke. The rogue faction was relentless, but the unity between the humans and the Zari proved to be too much. Finally, the tide began to turn. The rogue ships were pushed back, their once powerful assault faltering under the combined strength of the two species. As the battle began to wind down, Carter found herself standing next to Lyana once again. The silence between them was deafening as they surveyed the aftermath. The rogue faction had been defeated, but the cost had been high. Many Zari warriors had fallen, and several human crew members were injured. Yet, despite the loss, there was a sense of accomplishment in the air. They had fought together, and they had won. Lyana turned to Carter, her expression softening. "We did it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We saved them." Carter nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "We saved us all. And together, we'll build something better." The future of the Odyssey, of the humans, and of the Zari was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The bond they had forged in the heat of battle would be the foundation of a new era. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the Odyssey drifted through the black void of space, a sense of uneasy peace settled over the ship. The battle against the rogue faction had been a decisive victory, but the cost had been steep. Zari warriors had fallen, and several human crew members were injured. Yet despite the heavy toll, there was a glimmer of hope that both species had crossed a threshold that could never be undone. The fragile alliance was now stronger than ever, and the promise of a shared future hung in the balance. Captain Carter stood on the bridge, watching the stars flicker outside the viewport. Her thoughts drifted to the aftermath of the battle. The Zari had proven to be formidable allies, but the alliance had not been without its tensions. The rogue faction's attack had reminded them all that old fears and prejudices could not be so easily forgotten. But in the heat of the battle, something had shifted, not just in the hearts of the humans or the Zari, but in the very fabric of their relationship. They had fought side by side, blood for one another, and emerged victorious. For the first time in centuries, there was a tangible sense of unity between them. "Captain, we've received a message from the Zari High Council," Lieutenant Grant said, interrupting Carter's thoughts. She turned to him, her expression calm but alert. "What does it say?" "They've agreed to continue the peace talks," Grant replied, his voice filled with both relief and cautious optimism. "They're ready to move forward with the human-Zari alliance. They want to explore trade, technology sharing, and mutual defense. They believe we have the potential to create something greater than either species could accomplish alone." Carter felt a surge of hope. For all the fear and uncertainty that had clouded her thoughts in recent days, this moment felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. The Zari, with their advanced technology and fierce culture, had once been an enigma. But now, they were partners. Together, they could explore the stars, share their knowledge, and defend their worlds from whatever threats might arise. She nodded slowly, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Send our response. Tell them we're ready to build a future together." As Grant relayed the message, Carter found herself lost in thought. She thought of Lyana, her ally and friend, who had stood by her through the darkest moments of their journey. Their bond, forged in the fires of battle, had transcended the boundaries of species and culture. Carter had never imagined she could form such a connection with an alien, but Lyana had shown her that, at their core, they weren't so different after all. Both had fought for their people, for their survival, and for the future they wanted to create. Lyana entered the bridge, her presence immediately commanding attention. Her tall, powerful frame seemed to shimmer in the dim light of the room, the intricate markings of her exoskeleton glinting softly. Despite the weight of the day's events, there was a sense of peace in her eyes, a calm that Carter admired. Lyana had always been reserved, but there was no denying the quiet strength she radiated. She had become more than just an ally. She had become a symbol of hope, of what could be achieved when two people set aside their differences and fought for a common cause. "I've spoken with Veer," Lyana said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "He agrees that we must work together for the survival of both our peoples. The rogue faction has been scattered, but their ideas remain. We will need to remain vigilant, but I believe that the alliance is strong enough to endure." Carter nodded, meeting Lyana's gaze. "We've made history, Lyana, but this is only the beginning. We have a long road ahead of us. The peace we forged can only last if we continue to fight for it, day after day, together." Lyana stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "Together," she repeated, the word holding a weight far beyond its simple syllables. There was a bond between them now, a bond that neither time nor distance could erase. Carter had come to realize that this was not just about survival anymore. It was about something much greater, the potential for both humanity and the Zari to build a future that transcended the conflicts of the past. As the Odyssey continued its journey through the stars, Carter knew that the road ahead would not be without challenges. There would be obstacles, enemies, and setbacks. But she also knew that the alliance between humanity and the Zari was a beacon of hope, a beacon that could light the way for countless other species in the galaxy. Together, they would face the future with courage and resolve. They would rise above the old fears, the old hatred, and build a new world where cooperation, trust, and peace were the foundation of everything. The twin suns of the Zori world began to rise on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the planet's surface. As Carter looked out the viewport, she could see the first hints of a new dawn, both for the Odyssey and for the relationship between humanity and the Zari. The sky was no longer just a place for exploration. It was a place for hope. And as long as she had Lyana by her side, as long as the humans and Zari stood together, she knew that no challenge would be insurmountable. The future was theirs to shape, and they would shape it together.